I'm Debbie Travis.
And I'm Tommy Smythe.
And this is Trust Me, I'm a Decorator.
Hi, Debbie.
Hi. Good morning, good morning.
It is quite a good morning. We have an incredibly special guest with us today, one of my favorite people in all of Canada.
We do. So we have actually, we're a little bit intimidated because our guest is an interviewer. And as you will probably all know, Tommy and I are not. We just like to chat and have fun. But we have a professional on, but a professional who is famous for the fashion world. So welcome, Jeanne Beker.
Thank you.
So
Hi,
excited. You have a new book out, which we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about your life, which is absolutely fascinating. And I have read the book all weekend and love it. So many stories, which you probably don't know, but I was there when you did that.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So actually, I'm just going to start with one.
Okay.
You interviewed Paul McCartney on a movie called Broad Street. Give my regards to Broad Street.
Yeah. Not a very good movie, but he's
because I was in it. I was
Are
in
you?
that film.
I'm sorry. I mean, except for your performance, of course, which was stellar. Seriously,
Well,
Debbie.
all I had to do was snog some boy, which means kissing, on a pouring down railway station, which was Broad Street Station in London. I think I was probably 19 at the time. It took 3 days at 3:00 in the morning in the pouring rain. So when you said it was a lackluster movie, which you were absolutely right, I was kind of devastated, I have to say. That was my only movie.
That is okay. That's mind blowing. Oh, that's worth another chapter in the book. We'll have to interview you about that when this is done. How cool.
So, Jeanne, first of all, congratulations. There are so many angles to this book because you delve into the craziness of the fashion world. And I think all I can say by the time I finish the end of it is, wow, that takes chutzpah, because you got into some of those interviews and some of those people became your friends, which is really quite remarkable for such a tough business. But you were the girl battling to the front at all the Paris collections with your microphone and I used to see it with the cameraman being dragged. I think you had him by the throat sometimes. Because he was being too polite and you were like, just push your way in. But yeah, it's really great. And you also go into the story of your partner and your girls, which I thought was lovely. And then, of course, the last chapter, which has been not so pleasant, but you've kind of come out of that with flying colors.
Oh, yes, my cancer journey. Yes, when I was approached by Simon & Schuster to do a memoir, and it was strange in a way because I've got two other memoirs, one that came out in 2000, one that came out in 2011. So, I thought, they must just be wanting me now to tell the story of my cancer journey because I'd been public about it. And they said, no, we just think that you've got some great life lessons and, we want you to do just another kind of, recollection, maybe seen through a different lens. I chose the lens of wardrobe because that's how so many people know me. And that's how so many people, remember me. And it ended up being a wonderful exercise in editing, because if I didn't have a great, every chapter, these are all stories and they're not in any chronological order either. It's heart on my sleeve, stories from a life well worn. So every chapter starts with a garment or an accessory or a piece of jewelry. And I use those pieces as springboards into the storytelling. So even though I've got a lot of great stories in me, I couldn't tell all of them because not all had a piece of clothing or a piece of jewelry or an accessory that I could really tie to it. But
I like that because that relates to the reader, because everybody's got something that you never throw out in your wardrobe.
Exactly.
A pair of shoes, or like in your case, your red boots, and that's something that has a real memory wrapped around it, and you keep it even though it's 100 sizes too small, or you'll never wear it again. I mean, you're lucky you pass it on to your girls, but it's such a great memory, and I think that really relates to everybody.
Yeah, I really am hoping that the book will really make people see their wardrobes anew, perhaps for some people, or at least really appreciate the sentimentality behind these incredible pieces that one writer had called them their wordless witnesses to our lives. These garments, these pieces of clothing. I mean, they're with us. They're on us. They empower us often. Sometimes they, I suppose, like disempower us if we're not really feeling good about what we're wearing. But for the most part, these pieces that we treasure and that we cherish and that we remember so vividly, whether we actually physically still have them or not, because sadly, I don't have each and every garment that I'm writing about. I do have a lot of them, but some of them, my mom threw out my Sweet 16 dress. That was just such a sad day. But certain things we at least have pictures of ourselves in, or at least crystal clear images in our memory, in our hearts that we hold on to.
What about the maternity dress you had?
Oh, now that's a great story.
Was that Dior? Was that Christian Dior?
No, the maternity dress, although they probably shudder to think that I'm calling it that. This was a gorgeous dress that was gifted to me by Karl Lagerfeld in the first, long sit-down interview I had with him. The year was 1989. In the summer of 89, I gave birth in the fall of 89. So it was a sweltering hot day in Paris, and we went to the couture atelier of Chanel on the eve of the big couture show. And I felt like a beached whale. I mean, I probably shouldn't have even been traveling at that point, but I was determined to work up until the very last minute. So there I was sitting there in this drab olive green maternity outfit, feeling like a bit of a beached whale, and waiting for hours for Karl to arrive because he was always notoriously late, but whatever, it was Karl. He was worth the wait. And Gilles Dufour, who was his assistant at the time, said, "Oh, maybe you'd like to borrow something from Chanel for the interview." I went, "Oh, what an opportunity, like what a chance, but how could I possibly take advantage of that?" Because I had really gained a lot of weight during my pregnancy. I just thought, whatever, 3 milkshakes a day, let's go for it. And I thought, I'm not going to find anything that's going to fit me. And he goes, "Oh, no, come with me." And he took me into this little back room, and there was this glorious stash of couture garments, just mind-boggling. And we looked through the racks, and I'm just saying, "Oh, quel dommage. I'm not going to be able to find anything to fit." And all of a sudden, he pulled out a dress that it had this big white satin kind of chevron down the front. It was a little black crepe number with cap sleeves and those gorgeous pearl and gold Chanel trademark buttons, and a black organza camellia at the neck. And he's, "This one might fit you because it's a boxy cut. Just try it." And I thought, "Oh, okay, fine. How embarrassing." And I went into the dressing room, pulled off my clothes, looked at myself in the mirror and thought, "Merde, this is just not going to happen." But I tried the dress on, and voila, miraculously it fit. So I was delighted. Gilles was delighted. We waited another hour or two for Karl. Karl finally came in, sat across from him in the interview, and he complimented me, on the dress. "Oh, that's fabulous. It looks great on you." And I asked him if he had ever designed maternity clothes before. And he said once he did for Jerry Hall, but otherwise, no, not really. And at the end of the interview, we got along so famously. He said, "You know what? Ce sera un cadeau pour toi." That's going to be a present for you. And,
Wow.
the word cadeau in the fashion trenches, as you can imagine, is like, wow, the best word you could hear, because it means a gift. So they gifted me with this dress, and I have it to this day. So that's yeah.
I mean, I can imagine, having never been pregnant, obviously, I can imagine that there isn't any moment other than that where a fabulous dress might be more important than at a time when you're just feeling kind of like boiling hot and bigger than usual and carrying around all this extra weight. And, imagine the transformative, feeling of putting on this now. And
exactly.
I mean, incredible.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question about Karl? Because you interviewed him once, and I saw this, I think it was on television, and it stuck with me forever. So you stayed friends with him, and then many years later, I think he launched a home line or something not to do with fashion, like home or something like that. And you said to him, and you probably don't remember this, but you said to him, "How do you find time?" And he answered, because I don't think he was the most easy man to deal with, right? I think he was quite, difficult to deal with. But he turned to your camera and he said something that stuck with me forever. He said, "Let me tell you something." You said, "How do you find time to do this other project?" And he said, "If you ever want anything done, always ask a busy person."
Mm.
And I love that, because very often if you're in trouble or you're not well or you need help, the people who don't do a lot are always too busy to help. Those who are busy always find the time.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Tommy agrees with that. It's part of life. And that, I don't know, that must have been 20 years ago. And that's stuck in my head forever. Always ask a busy person for help.
Yeah, and that was Carl was just a master of busyness. I mean, he was such a creative, prolific spirit, and always was looking ahead. And that's another thing. Never wasted time looking back. I mean, I'm not. Look, at here I am saying this. Meanwhile, I've written a memoir which is all about looking back. I mean, nothing wrong with looking back, but in terms of really driving your life forward and yourself forward, and keeping positive and full of hope and faith, I think we really do have to keep focused on the future. And that was Carl. I mean, he really didn't even like talking about what he had just sent down the runway. Every time I'd grab him for a soundbite after the show, he wanted to talk about what he was going to create tomorrow. That's really exciting too. That's a good lesson for all of us.
There was an amazing documentary on him called Lagerfeld Confidential. And I remember a scene in the documentary where, and this speaks to what you were just talking about, Jeanne. There was a scene in the documentary where they're all in a car and the cameraman's in the back seat and Carl is in the passenger seat and they're talking. There's an assistant also present off camera. And you hear the assistant say like, "Oh, I've spoken to so-and-so and she's asked for a meeting on such and such a date." And Carl turns around and he looks and he says, "What? That's 6 months from now. We could all be dead by then."
Wow.
And I thought to myself, these are words to live by. Like, if you have to wait 6 months ahead, but
tomorrow is pretty safe. 6 months down the road
is a lot safer than 6 months. Oh.
Now, another favorite story in there, which is another kind of connection, because I'm talking to you from Tuscany, from Italy, and 20 minutes up the road, Sting lives in his villa. And I've been a couple of times. I even have Sting's stove. But you have, how you did this, you have a story where you interviewed him in the bathtub.
No, oh God, oh Debbie,
terrified that you wouldn't get the best bubbles.
Sting. No, darling, and that wasn't Sting. That was Andy Summers of the Police.
Oh, Andy Summers, right?
Yeah. Okay, but it's close enough. And honestly, I did have a very wonderful, friendly relationship with Sting, and I absolutely adore him. Who doesn't? Who wouldn't? There were all kinds of rumors swirling about me and him back in the day too. I wish they were.
I love that.
I wish they were true, but no. He never. Too much of a gentleman to ever, come on to anybody. Absolutely a gem. But I was lucky enough as a young music reporter, and these are in the early days of music television, pre-MTV, when I was doing a show called the NewMusic, which really set the ground for music television. And this is like pre-MTV, so around in the early 80s when the Police first surfaced, I got to go on the road with them. I went to Saskatchewan with them and rode the old tour bus with them, and we just had a magical time together. Really, lots of fun with the Police. And Andy and I did an interview in a Toronto hotel room, and he decided to be very naughty and playful, and he suggested that we do the interview in the bathtub. And I said, well, I'm not getting into the bathtub, but if you want to get in the bathtub, I'll interview you in the bathtub. So I sat on the edge of the tub and interviewed him, and he had his wee bottle of bubble bath that he sort of put in the tub, and the bubbles began to dissipate after the first 10 minutes of the interview, which was a little embarrassing. But anyway, so we did this interview. So fast forward, 20 odd years later, And the police had risen to, you know, incredible heights with their success. And I was doing fashion television. And Andy was also like an avid photographer, and he had come out with a book all about photographs, backstage stuff. And I thought, well, that would be a cool book to feature on fashion television. So my producer phoned his management people because they heard that he was coming to town to do a concert and promote the book. And they said, you know, Jeannie would really love to interview Andy about the book. Is that possible? And they said, okay, yeah, great. And they said, well, how could we do this? And, you know, and my producer said, well, last time she interviewed Andy, he was in the bathtub. And then, you know, so then they spoke to Andy, and Andy said, okay, let's do the interview in a bathtub again. And we'll have Jeannie come into the bathtub this time. And I'm like, really? And by this time I was like a 50-something-year-old, you know, mother. I'm like, what? I'm not, you know, I mean, I try to hang on to my inner teen as much as possible, but this was a wild notion. I suggested it to my mother, and she just about plutzed, as they say. She's not happy about the fact that I might be doing this. So the day of the interview, I thought, I don't think I'm going to have the nerve to do this. But I thought, okay, I'll pack my I had this little string bikini, like with a leopard trim. It was really cool. I'll pack it anyway and just see what happens when I get there. So got to the hotel room, great reunion with Andy. We loved it. And then Andy said, okay, you know, time to get into the tub. And it was like, okay, I'm going to do it. And I went into the bathroom and I changed into that little bikini. And I just thought, am I out of my mind? And Andy came out. This time he was wearing these kind of boxer shorts. So, you know, his junk was not on display, or would not be on display. And we got into the tub. And, you know, there was in this tiny hotel a suite bathroom, and there was my cameraman, and we had a photographer with us as well, and got into because I was doing this I was editing a magazine at the time, and I thought I would use the interview for the magazine as well. So great that we had the pictures. Got into the tub, and Andy had, you know, he was so charming. He had decorated the bathtub with these little votives all around the edge of the tub, like he wanted it to be romantic and fabulous. And he had ordered Cosmos from room service, and he lit up a big fat joint, you know, and there I was, you know, with the microphone in hand. And I had brought a big bottle of Mr. Bubble bath, which, you know, so I wanted to make sure that the tub would be filled with bubbles so no one would see too much of anything. And we got in, and Andy he's so brilliant and such an intellect, and started talking about, you know, life and art and the meaning of it all, and, you know, waxing on about, and he at one point took a big drag of his joint, you know, Cosmo in hand. And all of a sudden, Andy, your hair's on fire. His hair, because he had thrown his head. And it was like that, you know, Michael Jackson once had that disaster happen to him during a commercial. I thought, oh my God, this is like the end of the world. Like I dropped my mic. I don't know if it landed in the tub. We could have all been electrocuted. Screamed. Oh my God. And then it was like, oh, and he was just so cool. He was like, oh, really? You know, sort of like brushed it off, and okay, the flames subsided, and he just carried on with the interview, and it was like the most exhilarating experience as you can imagine.
That is incredible.
Great. It's on YouTube. I mean, I think if you Google Andy Summers hair on fire, you can see the video of it.
That is insane. I mean, there's hardline journalism, and then there's softcore journalism. You've done both, Jeannie.
Well, I did Google the one of Izzy Pop, and who was really rude to you. That I think that became quite a famous interview because he was so, God, he had bad teeth. Oh my God. And he was quite, and you said in the book, it's on YouTube. So of course I looked on YouTube, but what you were wearing then, I don't know how old you were, maybe 23 or something. But you looked so hot, and you could wear that today, suede camel colored jeans and a little kind of tight sweater and everything. And it was like, oh my God, I want that outfit. And I don't know when that was, like early 80s or something.
Yeah.
It was very cool.
No, I walked into that was an interview, you know, that was a disaster. Well, it was a disastrous interview on some levels, and it was a great interview on others, especially now in retrospect, because I really got the nerve to stand up to the guy, and he was just being really creepy, you know. And I, you know, when looking back at that now, I thought, wow, I've been interviewing people since I started in the media in St. John's, Newfoundland at the CBC in 1975. So I've been interviewing people for like a lot of years. And even since 1975 to this day, where are we, 2024, I've never walked out of an interview. I've never said, you know
You
what,
got up,
I'm
didn't
out of
you?
here.
You got up and
At
walked
that
out.
time, it was like he started, just being so disrespectful and so creepy to me. And I couldn't believe it because just a few months earlier, I had interviewed him at a Toronto, it was called Heat Wave, I think, a pop festival in Toronto. And he was coming on to me like, hey, you is that
Ugh.
chick? And and he was like eyeing me. And I was wearing, at the time, at the festival, I was wearing these vinyl jeans and I looked like really hot, I guess. I looked, rock and roll and edgy and everything. But the night that I went to interview him for this disastrous interview, I had been at my parents' house for a Friday night kind of Sabbath dinner. And I was dressed very conservatively in these lovely suede trousers and a red little cashmere sweater. And I looked kind of straight, I guess, to him. And I think when I walked in, and I got called by my producer in the middle of the night saying, we need you down at the Danforth Music Hall there right away. Iggy Pop's going to give us an interview. I said, but I didn't see the performance. I'm here having dinner with my parents. He goes, it doesn't matter. Come down here, be here by midnight. I got down there and I walked into this room and there were all these guys. I was like, the only girl, the only chick there, and all these guys, and they were like really knocking back the whiskey and just all kind of drunk and high. And it was the end of the show. And I think he looked at me like, who is this? He's probably not recognizing me from this past encounter I'd had with him. And he really just looked me up and down, and I wasn't wearing my tight vinyl jeans. I was, dressed quite differently. And I think he just judged me and thought, who is this bourgeois chick? I'm going to show her who she is. And showing off almost to all the guys standing around. He just wanted to show them how he could put me down. And it was just the simplest thing that triggered him. He told me he was writing a book. And I innocently said, oh, is that your first attempt at writing? And he goes,
yeah.
Attempt? Well, I could do, I've got more talent in my little finger than you could ever imagine having. And then he just started like putting me down. And it was terrible. Anyway.
It was like a train wreck. It was like, and you were so elegant because like I said, I watched it and everybody should watch it. I mean, it's just interesting to see a young woman like you, having the balls and the elegance, because you didn't shout, you didn't burst into tears. You just said, you know what, I think we're done. Thank you very much. Because he was like, because you said that one word, is this your first attempt? And he took it wrong, didn't he? And he was obviously drunk and he was drinking. You can see he's got a paper cup full of whiskey.
Yeah.
But he how old was he then? 50 something, 60, and you're like 20s. And you just can't get off his teeth because nobody has teeth like that anymore. I mean, bloody hell. And he was like, oh, and you just said, thank you very much. I think, we'll get out of here. And I thought, God, that took balls. So I think that, young people, if they want to get into this business, just see how to do this. Because I would have burst into tears.
Yeah, nice of you to say. Well, you know what? Trust me, subsequently, knowing that my producer, who loved that kind of television, he was going to use that tape. He wasn't going to scrap tape. He thought, this is TV gold, man. And put that on. And I did cringe a bit seeing it on TV because people thought, oh, yeah, especially the fans of Iggy. And he's got legions of fans. I mean, he's a very cool guy on some levels. There's no question of great talent. And, everyone was like, yeah, Iggy put Jeanne Beker down. Woohoo. And so that hurt. Listen, honestly, Debbie, I've shed a lot of tears in this business, as one would, because on one hand, you must have this very strong suit of armor, to deal with all the craziness of the business and all these big egos and all the mean stuff that's going to come your way. However, if you have a suit of armor that's too tough and that's too impenetrable, you will never be sensitive enough to have a wonderful connection with someone, to have a deep conversation with someone, so you must also remain sensitive. It's a, kind of a double-edged sword, very interesting line to walk. And I've really tried to do that, but believe me, I'm a sensitive person and I believe in crying a lot. And, listen, the name of the book, Heart on My Sleeve, that I'm very much about letting people, sort of know how I feel. I'm not going to be, that much of a phony about stuff. And I think it's great to express our emotions. So even though, I've cried myself to sleep in hotel rooms the world over, it's still been a pretty incredible life.
It is.
I know that about you because I remember when you interviewed my sister and Andrea on your podcast. At the end of the podcast, we all cried because, for me and Andrea and my sister, who are fashion designers, Jeanne, for our listeners, Jeanne was instrumental in the early success of my sister's label with Andrea Lenzner. So Christy Smythe and Andrea Lenzner have Smythe. And Jeanne, you were one of their first champions. And then, of course, for me, as a young gay kid growing up in Canada, the fashion television was, and the NewMusic, in fact, were touchstone connections for me to an outer world that, was a fantasy place for me. And so when you interviewed us, it was deeply emotional for us because it was kind of like a career goal. It was a milestone for us. And the three of us at the end of the interview started bawling with you because it was so special for us. And you and I have known each other for a really long time, Jeanne, socially and at events and things like that. But that particular professional moment, being interviewed by you, I think was emotional. And I think what you just said about being a person who is open to that when you do interviews, I think that invited that kind of connection. And I think, journalism is not easy, true and proper journalism. And you were able to have a career in music and in fashion journalism, proper journalism, that was able to cut through all of that bullshit and actually get to the information and to the heart of the matter. So Heart on My Sleeve, the book, being told through the stories of certain garments that were talismans in your life as a person, as a professional person, and as a human being. I think there's something really magical about that because of our connection to clothes. And I just wanted to read to you, the book opens with this fabulous quote from Susie Menkes. And it says, "Clothes, as much as music, have an eerie echo of time and place." And I don't think there could possibly be a quote that could sum up your career and your life's journey.
I just have to stop you on that for 1 second and I adore Susie Menkes. I mean, if there ever was like a great mentor, someone to look up to, someone who inspired me, and I learned so much from it, it's her. You got an advanced copy of the book, and in the advanced copies, because that was in the galley, I used that quote to open the book, and then we tried to, get the okay. And because that was a quote that had originally appeared in I think it was a Harper's Bazaar magazine story that Susie had written, they wanted to charge us an arm and a leg to use that quote. So we had to take it. So in the finished copy, you won't see that quote, but I'm glad it resonated with you and you got a chance to talk about it. Yeah.
And it lives here on the podcast now.
But on the podcast, you can say whatever, I'm sure. But I mean, it's quite funny because that is sadly not in the book at the end of the day. However, but it is true. Music and fashion really are such markers in a way of our times and our developments, like socially and just even personally.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the greats that you talk about in the book, who I think you really liked a lot, and again, our lives overlapped, we didn't know, was at Kate and Will's wedding. I was there with Entertainment Tonight. You were there, and Alexander McQueen, of course, was the dress. And we all... we were in those green boxes by Buckingham Palace, and we were given an iPad. And the information, and again, I'm not an interviewer. Why I was asked to do this, I don't know. But we were all given that second as she came out, because the world did not know who had designed the dress. And of course, we had to kind of look down with our eyes. And as soon as she walked out, it just in big letters, the four of us was me and Cheryl Hickey, and it just said Alexander McQueen. But you were the first one to announce it. Because you got it like a split second before.
Yeah, I was reporting for CTV actually, and that it was wonderful to be sent to that locale to do the story of fashion behind the royal wedding. And I was standing, at that moment, I remember standing atop a roof overlooking Westminster Abbey when she came out in that gown. But just the second that the car pulled up, just before she stepped out, I blurted out, and she's wearing McQueen, because the night before I'd been with my dear friend Todd Lynn, who is a London-based designer, originally from Toronto, and he gave me a bit of a scoop, because he said he'd been passing by the hotel where Kate and her family were staying, and he saw somebody carrying some big garment bag into the hotel. And I thought, oh God, well, that must be the wedding dress. He said, yeah. And I said, you know, any idea where it was coming from and what design house? Because, you know, the bookies were taking bets on this thing. It was like such a huge story. What design house is going to be responsible for the gown? And he said, well, I saw a pair of feet wearing these little black ballet flats. That, you know, whoever was carrying the bag was wearing these black ballet flats. And my friend Sarah Burton, who was the head designer of the House of McQueen at that time, always wears these black ballet flats. He says, so I'm pretty sure it's McQueen. And I thought, yeah, I mean, you know, McQueen had passed earlier that year, and it was just, you know, if anyone was going to be responsible for, you know, a dress for that royal wedding, I thought it should be the House of McQueen, even though at the time McQueen was owned by Gucci, the, you know, Italian company. So, but, you know, wow. Certainly, I just thought, you know what, I just was convinced that it was going to be a McQueen dress. And I think I probably felt, you know, the spirit of Lee McQueen, who I was, you know, quite close to, somehow, you know, nudging me to say it. Yes, it's okay, go for it. It's me, it's amazing. McQueen. And I just blurted it out and did have the scoop, you know, just maybe a second or two before everyone else. But
I know, because I remember somebody in the control room going, "It's all right, Jeannie's already told everybody." It was like, okay, you know, because it was all the adrenaline was off the chart. I have never in my life done anything like that wedding, because you're thinking on your feet. We started at 5 a.m, remember? And then you're talking about, you were probably talking about fashion. And you were given the names of everybody going into the Abbey, because, you know, even I didn't, I mean, Lord and Lady so-and-so, of course, you knew people like Elton John and stuff, but, and they're feeding this information to you. And then you go outside for a break and another journalist takes over, and there's Piers Morgan and, you know, Katie Couric and all these people sitting on steps, you know, just going, okay, back in. And it was hour after hour. Everybody sees it, of the kind of the tight little footage when they came, you know, they got married, and then the wave from the balcony. But it was all the before that was so fascinating and just so exhilarating. I'm still hyper from that.
It was what, were you wearing a fascinator? Did you
well, yes, but I'd never worn a fascinator before. And I know you had yours made. So I went to some rental place in London and got it. And then I called it a fornicator throughout the whole broadcast. And of course, I don't listen terribly well. And they kept waving at me going, no, fascinator. And I'm like, so my fornicator keeps slipping because, you know, whatever. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's when they came in fashion, right?
Yeah.
Jeannie, I wanted to ask you something else, because the part of the book that moved me a lot, which I really loved, was about your daughter. Because I think also a lot of mothers at the moment, this time of year, have become empty nesters.
Yes, all the children are going to university. Yeah,
exactly. And it's a very hard thing. But your child chose the Yukon of all places, and then decided she loved it. And hey, Mum, I'm staying. And you were like, what? And then you went to visit her, and she wasn't just staying in an apartment. She was down in the middle of the woods in a 2-shack house. What was that like as a mother? I mean, like, it must have been terrifying.
Yeah. Okay, now I'm going to get emotional again. And it's funny because I did the audio version of the book. You know, I recorded that, which was a great joy. And I got to this story, and they had to stop rolling because I was rolling. I got like the old tape recorder days. Oh, that's the way I think of the business. Because I just became, you know, very sad about it, because my daughter she came back. She's been in the Yukon now for 10 years, living off grid, in the woods by herself with her dog. She's a gorgeous young woman, really much stronger than I could ever imagine being. And she just really, I think, felt and maybe still feels that she wanted to do stuff on her own. You know,
Yeah.
really, again, she didn't want to be any kind of Nepo baby. She's a musician. And you can imagine, I've got quite a few contacts in the music world that no, 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 no. She never wants me to, you know, use my connections, or, you know, she said, Mom, you made it on your own. She wanted to make it on her own. And I think she's always been a great nature lover, for sure. So I understood why she had fallen in love with the Yukon. She'd only supposed to have gone there for 1 year to go to an art school there that was supposed to be a foundation year for OCAD University. But she fell so in love with the community there, and then decided that she didn't want to be a visual artist. She wanted to be a musician, because she was always a talented singer-songwriter, guitar player as well. And she phoned me, and she said, Mama, you know, I've fallen in love with the community, and I just want to stay here 1 more year. Well, 1 year led to another year, led to another year. So after 10 years, and she, you know, I went up to visit her several times, and she came back here. But during my cancer journey, she came out here, drove all the way in her, you know, camper.
Wow.
Truck.
How long does that take?
Yeah, it took her, she's a slow driver. She's very careful, but it took her a good couple of weeks. And she got here, and she was with me for a lot of my chemo treatments, and you know, she was great, a great support. And I got very used to having her around. And she's been here for the past couple of years, but just a few weeks ago, she's gone back. And it just, it kind of breaks my heart a little bit. But we all have to remember that the best thing we can do for our kids is give them a foundation and wings. And to see her, you know, be that independent, I mean, it really gives me a lot of pride as well. But, you know, an interesting choice. You know, this is a kid that, you know, I took, you know, she sat in the front row of the Christian lacrosse show with me when she was, you know, 12. So it's like, this is a kid that, you know, has seen the sights. So, you know, backstage at Valentino, meeting, you know, Gwyneth Paltrow and Martha Stewart. And you know, she's really seen so much of my life in that way, and then not really wanting to be a part of it. Or what, you know, you think, oh, your kids, you know, that's great when your kids follow in your footsteps. And I always encourage my kids to blaze their own trails. You know, the same with my daughter, Becky, my older daughter, who is an animator, filmmaker. You know, they very much about doing their own thing. Yeah.
But they were both supportive when you got ill, right? Which is, you know,
very much. Oh,
so important. Now, I want to ask you a question, because I was following you when you were going through this very, very hard time. And you were wearing, and I Googled it about this thing because I'd never heard of it, this cap, this cold cap, and it's got quite a history, hasn't it? So it's a cap that keeps your skull. They found that if you wear it, and you hated it, right? But it stops your hair falling out as much. And I thought that was because I saw you doing it on Instagram. And I thought, God, that's really brave. But I think for people going through that, when they're following you, it's a bit like having somebody to hold their hand, because somebody else is kind of going through it. So I thought that was amazing. And then I started Googling, what do they call cold caps or something?
Yeah,
so it's
cold
a cap.
caps. Yeah, I thought of it like it was like an ice helmet. Like a helmet that's filled with ice. It's like, talk about brain freeze. I mean, very uncomfortable for me anyway. I used to take, you know, I took a couple of extra strength Tylenol and a bunch of CBD drops every time before. You have to keep it on for a half an hour before you start your chemo infusions. Keep it on the whole time you're getting your chemo, and then afterwards keep it on for 90 minutes. So you're sitting there, you know, post chemo with this thing on your head. It's not pleasant, but I think it did help me hang on to some of my hair, not all of my hair. I still lost about 60% of my hair. But, you know, listen, even if I would have lost all my hair, I tell you, I would have worn that bald head like a badge of honor, as so many gorgeous women out there do. But it was a good distraction for me. You know, it's like, okay, I'm not going to worry so much about, you know, my breast cancer and this lump that I have to get removed, and this, you know, what's growing inside my body. I'm going to worry about my hair.
Well, you wrote
It was a good
it made me laugh out loud when you, I mean, I think humor is such an important thing when you're going through something awful, and you wrote about having your hair cut off and wailing on the hairdresser's chair. You cried all the way through the haircut, oh, no, but like you say, you just have to do it. And this poor hairdresser was like, oh God, that isn't. But so I want to finish off on a funny story. I want to take you back to, oh God knows when. It was an awards show at Exhibition Place in Toronto, and you and I were on stage together in ball gowns, and we had to wait backstage, and our feet, you had beautiful, sexy shoes on. I never wear sexy shoes, but you did. And there was horse shit everywhere. We fell in it twice. Do you remember? You probably don't.
No, I blocked that out.
You blocked that one out. And we had to wait. That some pimply youth said, wait here, your turn's coming up next. And of course, these award shows, people talk and talk and talk. And there were flies everywhere. And I don't know if you remember this, but we were swatting huge flies because it was piles of poo everywhere. And there we are in ball gowns. And then we walked on stage, and my ball gown had, like in the old days, they call it a boob tube. It was strapless, but it was straight across. And you did this enormous swat to some enormous fly and caught my boob tube as we walked out. And I walked on stage with one boob out. And didn't know.
Are you sure you didn't dream this up? This
no,
sounds like a nightmare.
And I sat there when I was reading the book, and when memories start coming back, and then I remembered, well, how did my dress come down? Oh my God, Jeannie was swatting a fly. Why was she swatting a fly at an award show? Because we were in the stables at the back of that awful building. I don't think they do it there anymore, but it was all posh behind one curtain, and then behind the other curtain, it was a stables.
It sounds like it must have been at the Royal Winter Fair, perhaps.
That's it.
Yeah, where they got all the horses and the ball gowns. Yeah. Interesting.
I think it was the Geminis or something like that.
Oh,
but anyway.
Well, listen, life is all about a high-low mix, right? So it's like the ball gowns and the poo. You just got to find your balance. Swat a few flies along the way, but everything to me now is such a metaphor for life. You can see and learn the most incredible things from just the small macrocosms of experience and adventure. So that's a funny story, but I think I blocked it.
Speaking of the high-low mix, there was a moment several years ago when I was scrolling through Instagram, and I've avidly followed you since we were both first on there. And suddenly there was this photograph of you in a canoe with Kate Moss, and she's smoking and paddling in the canoe. And I thought to myself, holy shit, this could only be in Jeanne Beker's Instagram feed.
That's surreal. I talk about that story.
Ask you, how did that happen?
That was amazing. Yeah, well, that was an amazing experience. Kate, I always loved from the very first time I met her. As a young model that was really always, she's quite humble and shy, and then we saw her incredible rise to fame, and didn't see her for quite a while. I'd stopped doing fashion television at the time. I think this maybe was around 2016 or something, and she was representing a Japanese skincare line, Decorator, and she came to Toronto, and I was going to interview her for the Globe and Mail, and we reconnected, and she was like, oh wow, Jeannie, how great to see you again. And it was just wonderful. And we started talking about, if we ever got our heads together, God, could we create a great kind of documentary series or a project about that golden age of fashion that we had both lived. So we thought, let's keep in touch. Maybe we can work on something. And anyway, a few months rolled by, and I somehow wooed her into coming to Toronto. That's sort of like, you can read the story in the book. But anyway, she ended up coming, but she said she'd only come to Canada if she could have a real Canadian adventure experience. So my dear friend Jeffrey Latimer has this great family cabin on a lake in Haliburton, and he said, well, we could all go to my family cottage. And I thought, okay, well, that'll be great. I don't know if she'll see any bears there, but let's take her. And she took a little private plane from Toronto to this cottage. It was Rosh Hashanah weekend, which was very strange. But, all of a sudden I realized, oh, it's Rosh Hashanah. I've got to do my traditional Rosh Hashanah dinner with Kate Moss. And so we did that at the cottage.
Amazing.
It was fabulous. And
Fabulous.
and the next day, for the ultimate experience, I thought we'd have to take her canoeing. So she and I got into a canoe, and she had her little flute of bubbly or whatever she was drinking, and a cigarette in hand, of course. And then I was,
with the cigarette.
I was the one like steering the canoe, and it was just, and I thought, how surreal is this? How could this be happening? Like Kate Moss is, she is such an iconic figure, but she
Glamour
is
girl.
the sweetest person, the funniest person, the most engaging person. I just absolutely adore her. And it made for a great picture for sure.
You said in the book it looked like a
very
Vogue.
high-low.
It kind of looked. You said in the book it looked like a Vogue shoot. Her at one end with this glass of champagne and a cigarette. And you said they could have shot that.
Yeah,
It's
except for what I was wearing. I was wearing, and that was, again, I used the piece of clothing as a springboard for the story, because what do you wear when you're going to hang out for a country weekend with Kate Moss? And I had a clothing line at the time, so I wore one of my little polyester print tops. And I thought, I'm wearing this cheap and cheerful piece, and I'm sitting there with Kate Moss. But it was okay, because she's the most unpretentious person. She's truly a gem. Yeah.
I mean, it's a story that could only happen in the life of Jeanne Beker. And I'm so grateful that you came to us today to share some of your stories. The book is Heart on My Sleeve. It is one of the most anticipated books in Canada, coming out this fall. Everybody's Christmas gift and holiday gift is going to be this book. Certainly, I'm giving it to at least 20 people I know, many of whom are mutual friends, so they'll have 2 copies, because you're probably giving them out to the same people.
So, Jeanne, a wonderful life, but what's next? More to come?
Always more to come. The thing I'm most excited about right around now, because it was just announced, there's a wonderful museum in Calgary called the Glenbow. And the Glenbow is currently undergoing a $200 million renovation. And the Shaw family has just donated $37 million. So when it reopens in June of 2026, it will be free for the only major cultural institution of that nature in Canada that is going to have free admission. And one of the big shows that they're going to be opening that gallery with in June of 2026 is a show that I'm co-curating, and it's a retrospective of my career.
Wow.
And it's going to be pretty fabulous. I think it's going to be very multi-layered, as you can imagine. There's going to be a lot of different stuff going on in the show. I have kept things in my life that you just wouldn't even believe. I've got the first TV set that my parents bought in 1953 in a mahogany kind of wooden cabinet that I grew up with as a kid. I kept that in my basement all these years. I've got the Bakelite radio that they bought when they came off the boat in 1948, and that was what we listened to morning shows on when I growing up. The little ballet outfit that I wore when I was 5 years old. So a lot of that stuff. But then, of course, even telling the story through the years of studying mime in Paris. There's a little film of me as a mime artist, if you can believe it, for someone who talks so much now. There's going to be a lot of fashion, of course, but a lot of the rock and roll and music stuff too. Lots of video and lots of the clothes that I wore at the time for special occasions, because, as I say, I've hung on to a lot of stuff. So Paul Hardy and I are co-curating this. There'll be lots of ephemera, like invitations to shows and programs, to fashion shows, and notes that designers wrote to me, like a lot of personal memorabilia. I think it's going to be really, really pretty cool.
That's
very
fantastic.
exciting.
Congratulations. I'm coming.
Yeah, 2020.
As soon as you have a specific date for the opening, I'm pressing my tux, I'm buying a plane ticket, and I'm getting a hotel, and I'm coming.
You'll be at the top of the list, darling. We'll send out the invites. Yeah, it should be fun. And it'll be up for a year. So, great. Yeah.
Fabulous.
Brilliant. Congrats. That's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well done. We'll all be there.
Yeah. No, it's going to be really fun. And I'm just so thrilled to be working with Paul Hardy, because I think I was the first one to cover his initial collection when, he launched his label over 20 years ago. And we've
yeah.
remained close friends ever since. And he's such a superstar in Calgary, especially, that's where he resides most of the time. So really fun to be able to see my life through his eyes as well. It's going to be cool.
But I wanted to say this is so special for us, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
So meaningful for me. I love the two of you to bits. I think you're just such talents and just such great people. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you, Jeannie. Thank you. Really fun book. Really fun.